I'm going to now still pass it on to Dr. Solomon to introduce our next speaker, who will be also paying tribute for fallen colleagues. Dr. Solomon? Not sure if you were able to hear me.
Give me a second. Yep.
Sure.
Professor Alex Doal, a good friend of Ethiopia, a good friend of Africa. I'll be honored to introduce him. Alex Doal is Executive Director of the World Peace Foundation, Research Professor at the Fletcher School, Tufts University, and Professor Fellow at the London School of Economics. He worked on the Horn of Africa and on humanitarian issues since the 1980s as a researcher and practitioner. He was the author of the Human Rights Watch report, Evil Days, 30 Years of War and Famine in Ethiopia, 1991. Doal's recent books include The Real Politics of the Horn of Africa, Money, War, and Business of Power, which is dedicated to the memory of Meles Zenawi and mass starvation, the history and future of famine 2018. Professor Alex Doal has been voice to the voiceless of Tigray, particularly over the last couple of months. He has pursued and made sure the world knows what's happening in the Horn of Africa, particularly in Tigray and the war on Tigray. I'm honored to call upon Alex Doal to pay his tribute.
Thank you very much. I'm honored and humbled to be called upon to say a few words at this time. We're meeting at a time of unspeakable tragedy and loss. And we are all deeply aware of the uncounted numbers of people in Tigray who are in mourning for their loved ones, including many friends and family who perished in war, of hunger and disease, or at the hands of cold-hearted killers. And our prayers also go out to all those who go to bed every night not knowing of the whereabouts of their family members or their fate, and whose first thought in the morning is a dreadful anticipation of what the news of the day may bring. And we also cannot forget those who a generation ago sacrificed so much beyond ready comprehension in the struggle for liberation. Let me say a few words, and I will just say a few about His Excellency, Minister, Ambassador, Comrade Seyum Mesfin, a man of the people, a peacemaker, a patriot, a devoted husband and father, and a friend. And I will be brief because I've had the privilege of being able to pay my tribute already in public. And I know there are many others here who want to take this rare opportunity to speak. So I'll just say a few words, first of all, about my first impressions of meeting Comrade Seyum, as he then was, in the field in 1988, on the back of a captured Russian military truck that served for 3 nights as the traveling field central committee of the TPLF. It was more like a traveling seminar. We discussed revolutionary politics, we discussed world events, rural development, conservation, ecology, and how the TPLF would treat those other Ethiopians whom it had captured. And under the shade of trees during the day, sheltering from the relentless bombardment of the Ethiopian Air Force, we would continue those discussions. This was a remarkable revolutionary generation, principled, brave, selfless, ready to make enormous sacrifices, who spent the best years of their life risking every day not knowing whether they would see the following day, living at night and spending the day in caves. And I recall going to the town of Hausien at that time, 1988, and speaking to the survivors of that massacre, who told me about how the smoke and dust kicked up by the bombardment of the Air Force made the midday as dark as night. And all those who have a sense of history in Ethiopia know that the role of the leadership of the TPLF, including Comrade Seyum, and how crucial it was to bring Ethiopia out of those days and years of darkness into the modern era. I remember Seyum as a man always ready to argue, to discuss, but with a core of principle that one could never shake. He was a humble man. He never claimed glory or honors for himself. Although when his achievements are stacked up, he achieved more for peace over the course of his time in office than any other senior Ethiopian before or since. And he never once sought out adulation or international prizes. I'll tell just one little anecdote, which is after taking power in 1991. One of the protocol challenges was the need for marching bands in Addis Ababa to welcome visiting heads of state. And the EPRDF fighters refused point blank to dress up in costumes, to play brass instruments, to march in step. And Seyum, then foreign minister, was tasked with explaining that being a state required playing by some of those rules. And so some of the old guard from the old regime, from that old army, had to be brought back to play those roles, to perform those duties. And he performed this with his characteristic good humor, he explained this. Seyum was immensely personable. He always had good humor. His door was always open. He was, I think, adored by his staff. He cared for their families. He always asked for them. He even cared for his adversaries, for those whom the EPRDF had defeated. My other particular anecdote I want to recall is meeting him in his office and he insisting that I go and visit the defeated, incarcerated senior officials from the Derg, who were at that time in a dormitory at the university, with 2 guards on the gate, not to prevent them escaping, but to prevent the ordinary people breaking in and attacking them. Because he said, without a hint of bitterness, we have to put this history of revenge, of annihilation behind us. We must lay the past to rest. We will not annihilate our adversaries. We will turn the page. We will make sure they face justice. I could speak at length about the achievements of Minister Seyum in the Foreign Ministry, about the principles that he carried forward and the new principles he enunciated, putting poverty reduction at the center of Ethiopia's, not only its developmental policy, but its foreign policy. So much of the foreign policy that he constructed was in order to safeguard those economic achievements. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, for example, was not only an enterprise to develop the nation, but also a foreign policy enterprise to ensure that Ethiopia's rivals in the region would be kept at bay. And it's hard to recall, as Ambassador Bahane has reminded us, but 30 years ago, Ethiopia was a pariah state. It did not have full diplomatic representation from the United States, among others. Its leaders were reviled. And Ambassador Minister Seyum did an enormous amount of work to make Ethiopia proud, to rehabilitate Ethiopia's reputation. But this was not, as the foreign policy white paper of 2002 says, this was not jingoism on an empty stomach. This was the true pride of a country that was pulling itself up, that could be truly proud of its achievements. Seyum was personable. He was soft-spoken, but he could be passionate and angry. And few of those who were there will forget his angry speech after the attempted assassination of Hosni Mubarak in 1995, when he blamed the Sudanese correctly for sponsoring terrorism in the region. And others have been on the receiving end of his acerbic anger when they have recklessly or foolishly upended some of his key policies, such as maintaining a proper balance and distance from Egypt and the other states of the Arab world. Overturning some of the principles of the Pax Africana that he, in the greatest tradition of Ethiopian statesmen, had labored so hard to build. As I mentioned, I had the privilege of being able to publish a simple tribute to Seyum about a week ago, the sort of tribute that should have poured in from around the world. So let me only say one more thing, which is that it is small solace that after I published that, many individuals in governments in the region, in Africa and around the world, contacted me personally to say that I had spoken words that they wish they could have spoken on behalf of their governments in their official capacities, but could not do so. And indeed, I also had such messages from within Ethiopia, from within the government. Seyum was a great man, a peacemaker, a patriot, and Ethiopia owes him a great deal. And I trust that in due course, all Ethiopians will have the opportunity to recognize and honor him in the way that we are seeking to do today. I thank you.